Magnus Midtbø is a professional rock climber, a professional YouTuber, and a professional ninja warrior. He owns a professional training platform in one of the top athletic apparel brands in the world. But what does Magnus do when he's not working? What do Norwegians do when they're not pretending to be old men rock climbing? They compete in game shows. A few months ago in February 2024, we saw the debut of a new Norwegian game show, Vinnerskalle, and featured in the inaugural season was none other than Magnus Midtbø.
Magnus Midtbø.
This show pits 10 retired professional athletes against each other in a series of physical and mental challenges. Starting with the first challenge, the ball roll. All the names are in Norwegian, so I don't know what it's actually. In this challenge, contestants must roll a yoga ball through an obstacle course with multiple areas of the course covered in ice. Now, Magnus's climbing skills don't really help him here, but he's able to get across the ice relatively easily, which is more than I can say about some of the other contestants.
Nei, det har hun tydeligvis ikke. Får det ikke til denne gangen heller. Og der forsvinner også ballen feil vei. Ragnhild skikkelig ute å kjøre.
So Magnus finishes the event in third place for the men, putting him smack dab in the middle of the leaderboard. And at this point in the show, we get to know our contestants a little bit more, and we are introduced to Frank, the Alpha. Frank is a very confident man who is sure that he's going to win this competition.
At du kommer til å dra i land seieren. Tenker du ikke det?
Absolutt.
Now, all the other contestants on the show seem a little bit annoyed by Frank's attitude, but it's almost like they expect it, and I guess this is because Frank is pretty famous in Norway. He's a very famous Norwegian, not only for being an alpha, but for being a professional handball player. I don't know if this is a European thing or just a Norwegian thing, but in America, handball is a game you play in gym class because kids are too uncoordinated to play soccer. I didn't even know you could go pro in handball. Like, if somebody came up to me and told me they were a professional handball player, I'd be like, oh, that's cool. My mom's a manager at Burger King. So right off rip, Frank establishes himself as the villain because he's an alpha. And now we move on to the second challenge, the ball throw. Now, I know some of your hearts just sank when I said that. And for those of you that don't know, in the last game show that Magnus competed on, he spent about 20 minutes trying to throw a tennis ball through a target, which ultimately got him eliminated. But I have good news. Magnus learned to throw.
I go hard in the motherfucking paint, nigga.
Now, they did have to craft these balls themselves with the only materials at their disposal being cotton and string. And Team Magnus's ball was a little on the side, but they managed to make it work.
Magnus treffer. Det skal ikke mye til for å velte den bøtta. Og kan Silje avgjøre? Og det gjør hun!
But surprisingly, the winner of this event was actually another team with a dude named Salom. And Salom is an Olympic sprinter who's legally blind. Now, normally I'd say that putting a man with 2% vision in a throwing competition is cruel, but he is by far the most accurate.
Salum. Treffer. Salum igjen. Treffer nok en gang.
Med å se så dårlig, så får du noen andre gode sanser. Så når jeg først traff han en gang, så visste jeg liksom hvor han var i hodet mitt.
According to Salom, he was able to compensate for his bad vision using his other senses. I don't know what the fuck that means. I don't know if he could smell where the bucket was and therefore determine its distance, or if he was using echolocation to hear where the bucket was, but the results speak for themselves.
Solveig, bøtta vipper på kanten. Endelig treffer hun og sikrer seieren.
Now, a lot of you probably want to know, how did Frank do? What happened to our resident alpha? Well, Frank's team managed to slap together the poorest excuse for a ball you have ever seen. And I'm not exaggerating, even the host had something to say about it.
Andre den lille ungen deres?
Nei.
Det misfosteret her.
I know I haven't talked about the host very much yet, but this dude is wild. I mean, he cracks jokes constantly, and they're actually pretty funny. Pretty much anytime anybody had something to say, he would just rag on them immediately.
Her skal dere bo.
Ja, det var ikke så gærent det.
Det ikke så gærent det, Frank.
Nei? Det mulig for...
Nei, Jan Tore, du kan ikke onanere her inne.
So our next challenge is where things get really weird. But before we get into that, let's talk about this video's sponsor, Rungna. If you're a fan of Magnus Midtbø, then you probably already know that he started his own athletic apparel company called Rungna. And not only do they make athletic apparel for all different sports and all different shapes and sizes, they also make things for climbers too. Like the new Church of Dynawology chalk bucket. Store your chalk in the fashionable, multicolored Church of Dynawology chalk bucket with a fully magnetized seal so you don't lose any of your mag dust, and an extremely satisfying clasp. So if you want to pick yourself up a Church of Dynawology chalk bucket with magnetic seal and satisfying clasp, head to the Rungna store and enter Dino20 to get 20% off any creator chalk bucket. But who are we kidding? You're gonna get the Church of Dynawology one. And for those of you non-climbers out there, if you just want to get anything else off the store, maybe a sloper tee, a nice athletic tee, or maybe some of these nice shorts I got on right now, use code DINO at checkout and get 15% off your entire order. Now let's move on to the next challenge. So this next challenge is absolutely ridiculous. People are fucking chugging milk and spinning on shit. People are putting potatoes in sacks and jumping on them to make mashed potatoes. They're dropping eggs. People are bashing their heads into each other. But the only important thing you need to know about this challenge is Magnus can't chug milk as fast as Isaac, so he loses the challenge. But Magnus more than makes up for it in the next challenge, which is a race where you have to catch the person in front of you. And to everyone's surprise, Solemn, the Olympic sprinter, got caught by Magnus. Wow. I bet he didn't see that coming. So they do this wheelbarrow race next, and Magnus immediately spills all the water, but it turns out that the time you finish in is much more important than the amount of water left in the bucket, so he tries to get his team to hurry the fuck up.
Bare drit I vannet. Bare gå så fort du klarer. Vi kommer til å miste alt uansett.
After this, there's a backwards race. Magnus gets 5th. There's a scrap metal cart race where Magnus pile drives his teammate into the ground for the win. They do this barrel rolling, water filling thing where Magnus gets 3rd, and at this point it's clear that Magnus and Frank are the front runners in this competition. And even though they act all buddy-buddy, there's some underlying tension.
Neste dag så våkna hele gjengen til
Det her vet du om jeg tør å drikke, så får jeg fukt opp det her, så eliminerer litt konkurranse. Hvorfor du så snill plutselig, vel?
The next challenge was one of my favorites because it was the only challenge in the entire show where we got to see a professional athlete in their element. For this challenge, the competitors had to dribble a soccer ball through a course, then keep the ball in the air for 5 bounces, then shoot a goal. And they had to do all of this in ski boots. And while Magnus did okay in this challenge, none of the competitors would even come close to the first place competitor, Solveig. And if you can't tell, she's a professional soccer player. The next challenge is a math challenge where the competitors have to sprint down, grab the correct solution to the math problem, and bring it back to win. And Isaac is self-admittedly not the smartest contestant on the show, and he really struggles to solve the math problems in time, so he decides to just cheat off Silhe and actually makes it back before her.
Sorry.
Fitte helvetes pikk. Han står og ser på hva jeg plukker.
Jeg berget meg på makker. Jeg er like lei meg for at du ryker nå, Silje, for da ryker jo alle svarene mine.
And of course, Frank uses this opportunity to let everybody know that he's a member of Mensa and goes on to win the challenge.
Jeg har ikke trua på Isak, ass. Han kan mye, men tall, nei. Jeg møter ikke han på landstreffet for Mensa I Drammen nå I oktober.
Som medlem av NASA, eller Mesa, eller Mensa, eller hva faen han var for noe.
There's a bunch of uninteresting stuff after this. There's a log race, there's a big puzzle challenge where Frank faceplants, and Magnus gets bit by a snake. But the most truly unique event is the raft race. Contestants have to build a raft with the supplies allotted, then swim the raft over to an island where they will roll a cigarette and proceed to smoke it. Yeah. So Frank being Frank builds his raft way too quickly and it falls apart as soon as it hits the water. Isaac's team builds a somewhat sturdier raft, but it also falls apart, this time halfway across the lake. But Magnus and Cecile build a much sturdier raft and make it all the way to the island, where Magnus rolls a fat spliff for the win. This late in the competition, this was a big win for Magnus, but despite this victory, Magnus ends up spazzing out and knocking over his own tower in the next event, taking last place and putting him up for elimination. Now at this point, you might be asking yourself, where did all the other competitors go? What happened to Salom and Isaac? Well, at the end of every day, the bottom 2 competitors compete in an elimination duel, which usually involves a treadmill and some water. And while these duels have some funny moments, they're probably the most boring part of the entire show. But this time, Magnus is up for elimination. And I think the most relevant part of this entire video to this channel is that Magnus thinks that he has an advantage in this challenge because his rock climber grip strength will help him wring out the water faster.
Jeg tror kanskje ikke det er så mye fordel av klatring, men kanskje det er akkurat det å vri de der håndklene litt.
And you know what? He was fucking right. And something I noticed while watching these elimination challenges was just how low budget this show actually is. I mean, they have a treadmill that's just haphazardly slapped together using pieces of scrap plywood, and they just literally took a mattress and put it up against the wall as a protection. Even the challenges themselves are extremely bare bones. I mean, they all take place in the exact same patch of grass next to some random road. You and a group of friends could each pitch in $20 and recreate this entire show. But I really do think that the low budget adds to this show's charm. Like, the next challenge is literally just a pillow fight. And I know I always meme in these videos about how Magnus's climbing skills help him in these random challenges, but this time they actually do. Magnus's balance and core strength make him virtually impossible to knock off this log, while Frank is just swinging for the fences and accidentally throws himself off balance until he falls. But for you Frank lovers out there, fear not, because he manages to survive by bashing the next contestant's brains in while they try to pull a Muhammad Ali. After this, there's like a quiz section. It's kind of interesting if you watch the actual show, but that you guys wouldn't understand any of it. So the last competitor gets eliminated, and we enter the finale. Frank versus Magnus. First, the competitors do the ball throw obstacle. Then, they will bust a pair of swim trunks from a block of ice, thaw them, put them on, swim a lap around the lake, and the first one to ring the bell is our Vinnarskalle. The ball throw is neck and neck, as Frank gets an early lead, but Magnus is right behind him. But this is where things take a turn for the worst. Frank discovers that there's actually a seam in the ice where the two blocks were connected, and that attacking this directly will compromise the entire block. Magnus does not discover this. So Frank splits the block in two, gets his trunks, thaws them, puts them on, swims his lap, and becomes the Vinnarskalle. And while Frank was the winner, a real Vinnarskalle, I think both these competitors really dominated this game show. So now you guys can't get mad at me for using that in the title. And a lot of people ask me when I make these episodes, how can I watch this, right? You always cover these game shows, but they don't show us how we can watch them ourselves. It's actually really simple. I'll explain it right now. All you have to do is connect to Norway with a VPN. Then get a fake Norwegian phone number or a real one. Use that to sign up for a Norwegian TV2 subscription plan. Once you have the Norwegian TV2 subscription plan linked to your fake or real Norwegian phone number, you must stay connected to the VPN and pull up the show, which does not have English subs or dubs, so then you must use Google's auto-translate feature to translate the subtitles from Norwegian to your language of preference in real time, and bam, you can watch Vinnarskalle too. It's that easy. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember, if you want to help support the channel and Magnus, try picking up a Church of Dinowology chalk bucket. Use code DINO20 and get 20% off your Church of Dinowology chalk bucket.